Hi, and welcome to this brief overview of the Pac Mountain Workforce Development Region's 2018 Memorandum of Understanding and Infrastructure Funding Agreement, and these new cost-sharing agreements, which we thought you would need a little bit more background to better understand. By now, you should have several documents in front of you: a Memorandum of Understanding, 4 cost-sharing agreements, one for each of the sites, and a document called Changes to the MOU that shows all of the questions we received and how they're addressed in the MOU, IFA, and cost-sharing agreements. You may have noticed that the MOU no longer has an attachment C and instead has added an attachment B, a summary of the annual allocated cost shared by partners, so that each organization can see where its total costs are for the system. When Pac Mountain started this process back in March, it started with a series of interviews, knowing that this time the IFA would be collecting actual costs, not just describing costs. So they gathered partner feedback to improve the document. And as a result of those interviews and some meetings, they developed a process for reaching agreement, revised the cost-sharing formula, defined what in-kind and non-cash contributions meant, and completed the numbers for the budgets. On April 18th, Pac Mountain also received a template from ESD sharing language that was required from the RSAs that had previously existed. In May, the WDC integrated that language into the MOU and IFA, and early in June sent it all out for signature. However, when the partners saw it, they had a number of questions, which caused the recall of the document in order to make further edits and to further clarify several of the questions that were raised. In the process, the WDC spent most of June developing site-specific cost-sharing agreements to accompany the MOU and IFA as a way to address the concerns and questions that were raised. So here we are in July, and we're finally ready for MOU and other document signatures. The challenge was that resource sharing agreements, which predated the IFAs, had language that was required by state agencies for cost sharing. The IFAs did not. ESD provided a template of that language and labeled the template Infrastructure Financing Agreement. And what the WDC did was to add that template to the MOU for reference because there wasn't enough time to develop site-specific agreements for each of the sites. So it was just meant to show these are what's going to be included in those agreements. However, the title Infrastructure Financing Agreement was confusing. The lack of completed actual documents was confusing. And so the document was called back in order to create a new resolution. And so the resolution was to remove the template from the MOU and the IFA, and then to work with ESD to develop those cost-sharing agreements for each site that would replace the expiring resource-sharing agreements. A table was also developed to show each partner's total contributions to help clarify further how all this process works. The cost-sharing agreements are the language that was lost when the RSAs expire. They clarify things like who will do the billing, how and when, how space can be shared, indemnification language, things like that, that are specific to each site. They include budgets for each site and the contributions each partners will make, so you can dig much deeper than what's available in the infrastructure funding agreement. The cost-sharing agreement for Thurston is unique because it has 2 components. There's the space that is allocated across all the partners. That's the resource room and the 4 training rooms that's shared across all the partners based on the 3 weighted factors, which is the tiers of participants, their on-site presence, or their proximity to the site if they're not on-site. The remaining costs, the cost that the on-site partners have for their space, is also allocated in the Thurston cost-sharing agreement. And it includes rent, which is based on square footage, and non-rent, supplies, materials, janitorial, etc., that are shared based on FTE. The other 3 sites, Mason, Lewis, and Grays Harbor, have their costs shared just across on-site partners. Again, rent based on square footage, non-rent infrastructure based on FTE. Here's another way of looking at the resolution that we came up with. The MOU and IFA is the framework. It describes the system, the costs of running the system, and how the partners will share the system. The cost-sharing agreements are the details that allow for the collection of the resources among the partners. The two documents are cross-referenced so that you can see how one relates to the other. And specifically, you'll see how the costs are carried over from the MOU and IFA into each of the cost-sharing agreements. Here's another way of looking at this. In this table, you've got the partner agencies on the left and the sites across the top. All of the partner agencies are included in the IFA. Those who have costs are also included in the Thurston cost-sharing agreement. For example, Sound Learning, because the colleges are picking up their costs, do not have costs. They appear in the IFA, the Infrastructure Funding Agreement, but not the cost-sharing agreement for Thurston. Those partners who are on site also have additional costs in the cost-sharing agreement. For those who have subleases, those subleases do not go away. They are referenced in the cost-sharing agreement, and any additional costs they have are in those agreements. For those who do not have subleases, all they have are the cost-sharing agreements on the Thurston site. For those with on-site staff at the remaining 3 centers, all you have are cost-sharing agreements. There are no leases for those sites. Here's yet another way that we look at this, and this is a summary of that attachment B4 that was added. In the first column, you have all the partners. Across the top, you have the sites. And in this case, what you see are the cost per partner with a total by agency on the far right-hand side, so that each partner will be able to see exactly what their total costs are. When you move to the bottom 3 rows on the page, you'll see some in-kind costs listed there. Costs for IT that are provided by ESD, those are not allocated among the partners. Those are ESD's costs, and they're not allocated out to the partners. They're an in-kind contribution in addition to what is being paid by the partners. Same thing with Timberland Regional Libraries for the connection sites. They have an in-kind cost as well. So our bottom line includes those in-kind costs as well as the other costs for infrastructure. Couple of other minor revisions to the MOU and IFA. Headers were updated, references to attachments were updated, a template was removed as we mentioned, that was attachment C, and there were some minor language revisions. We did not provide those in a track changes format because those revisions are not substantial. They were clarifications that came out of partner questions. You've got a table for B or B4 that shows how all the partners' costs are across the whole system. And then everything's been double checked, so we have the final numbers based on the final formulas that were agreed to by partners. So what's next? Well, first we're asking that all partners review the MOU and IFA and gather the appropriate signatures by the end of the month. For those partners with costs for the Thurston Center, we're asking you to review that cost-sharing agreement and gather your signatures by the end of the month as well. If you're not sure if you have costs in the Thurston Center, take a look at that agreement. There's a table on page 1, finishes on page 2. If your organization is listed there, you are expected to sign the cost-sharing agreement for the Thurston Center. For the remaining 3 sites, it's the on-site partners who need to take a look at those cost-sharing agreements and sign off on those. And again, you can check those tables on the first page of each of those agreements to confirm whether or not you have costs on site. If you have any questions or any concerns, if you would like for us to set up a conference call to discuss this further, or if you're afraid that you won't be able to make the deadline because of things that you have going on in your own agency, please contact Corinne and let her know so that she can respond to those issues and route things appropriately. Thanks for your time, and I hope this is helpful in reviewing your obligations and the way that the system has been set up with the various agreements that we've developed.